Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Aviation Week webinar, Mergers and Acquisitions, 5 Costly Mistakes Sellers Often Make. And this is sponsored by Alderman and Company. I'm Ed Hazelwood, and I'll be moderating today's event. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, to download resources, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place during the live presentation. To participate in Q&A, simply type your question into the text box located to the left of the presentation window, or click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If we're not able to answer all submitted questions during today's webinar, we'll be sure to share them with their speakers and they can reply to you offline. For privacy purposes, identities are going to remain anonymous if your question is presented during the live presentation. We understand this is a potentially sensitive topic today, and so we're going to keep everybody's names anonymous. So please feel free to start those inquiries often, and our panel is very eager to dive in. The slides are going to advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the resources widget. Towards the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey. It's found on the right-hand side of your screen. And please take a minute to fill this out before you leave us today, because your feedback will give us valuable information on how we can improve future events. And lastly, if you are experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be glad to offer you one-on-one assistance. So now, getting ready to go on to our presentation, Mergers and Acquisitions, 5 Costly Mistakes that Sellers Often Make. Discussing today's topic are Bill Alderman. He's the president of Alderman and Company. Bruce Andrews, the managing director of defense at Alderman and Company. Kevin Gould, the managing director of aerospace at Alderman and Company. And Ryan Kirby, vice president at Alderman and Company. To learn more about our very prestigious panel of speakers, be sure to check out their impressive bios in the Speaker Bios widget found within the webinar platform. And so with that, gentlemen, I hand it over to you.
Introduce our topic. Today's topic, as Ed eloquently said, is 5 mistakes sellers often make. And we're going to specifically offer 5 case studies as we go through this. In each of these case studies, as Ed mentioned, we're very sensitive to our client confidentiality. There will not be enough descriptive information in these case studies for the identities of our clients to be provided. However, there's enough detail in there so that you will understand the basics of the client, their business, and the issue that we faced in each of these case studies. If we can move to the next slide. Very briefly, I know many of you on this webinar know who we are, quite well, but I'm sure some of you don't. Just 6 bullet points, literally 6 bullet points that we think describe who we are pretty clearly. We are M&A bankers, sell-side M&A bankers, investment bankers. We advise companies that are doing mergers and acquisitions. Almost exclusively, jumping to the last bullet point, 95% sell-side, meaning that 95% of our clients over the past 21 years have been sellers. We've done some work with buyers. We think it's good for our knowledge base, but it's quite frankly not what we like to do. What we love to do is advise sellers. It's our passion. We were founded 21 years ago. We are exclusively aerospace and defense. We are exclusively mergers and acquisitions, and we are exclusively in the middle market. And with those 6 bullet points, you pretty much know everything we do. We'll advance to the next slide. I will quickly introduce myself, as I said earlier I would, and then I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves. I founded the firm 21 years ago. I've done lots of deals. I think now it's totaling over $1 billion worth of transactions. I have my MBA from Kellogg, the Northwestern University, and I'm also been a commercial pilot for many years. I actually started flying about 40 years ago. And Kevin, if you'll introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Kevin Gould. I'm the managing director of the aerospace practice. I've had a career in aerospace, held positions in M&A, corporate development, and executive leadership. I've got an MBA and a JD, and I'm a pilot. Bruce.
Good day, everyone. I'm Bruce Andrews. I run the defense practice for Alderman and Company. I've been 25 years in the M&A business in aerospace and defense. And prior to that, largely CEO of defense and aerospace companies. 21 of those years have been with Alderman and Company. I've got a bachelor's in chemical and metallurgical engineering and a master's in business. With that, I introduce Mr. Ryan Kirby.
Hello, I'm Ryan Kirby. I'm a VP at the firm, and I'm responsible for deal processing. I have my MBA concentrating in finance. I have previous work experience in FP&A, mortgage lending, and a NASA-funded project concentrating on the commercialization of space. I'll hand it over to Bill, who's going to introduce each case study.
Thanks, Ryan. So these are the 5 topics, and there'll be a case study under each that we'll go through this morning for those that are on the East Coast. I'll highlight what they are now, and then I'll hand it over to my colleagues, and we will go through these one by one over the next 45 minutes to an hour. So I won't go into these now, but just introduce the topics for you. The first is an unalignment or unaligned management incentives. And this is not in order. These are 5 topics that we as a team decided were the relevant topics to bring to your attention today. They are not listed in any order. In fact, I think you'll hear me say later in the day that a later number than 1 is my pet peeve. But the first item is unaligned management incentives. The second item we'll talk about are due diligence failures. Number 3 are unsupported projections. Number 4, not achieving current year forecast, which, as you'll hear from us, is aligned but different than item number 3, aligned 2, but different from number 3. And the last one, but again, not in any order, is having inexperienced professionals work on your transaction. So with that as an introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Andrews, who will talk about management incentives not being aligned. Bruce?
Great. Thanks, Bill. First of all, let me explain why incentives are important. It is important when you're selling your company that your key people, the key management of your company, be properly incentivized so that they work as a team to achieve the ultimate goal of selling the company. We've seen many, many times that that's not necessarily the case where incentives are in place or properly documented. And what you have in front of you is one case study that happened several years ago. It was a large aerospace defense company, very successful, about $80 million in revenue, ultimately sold to a public aerospace company. And there is a key member of the management team who had been orally promised a sales bonus if and when the company was sold. And that was a number of years prior to the sale process, 10 or 12 years. As we're doing the sale of the company, the particular individual, after a signed letter of intent, retained counsel and insisted that the company pay a large sale bonus to him, which had not been documented when it was orally promised many years ago. Needless to say, that extended the length of the time of the deal and cost the owners of the company a substantial amount of money. We estimate it was probably around $1 million, substantially more than what would have been paid had it been documented at the time of the oral commitment. We had another case of a defense electronics firm a few years ago, very successful company, ultimately sold to a well-known PE firm, where one member of the management team had an incentive that was effectively a flat bonus, independent of where or who the company was sold to. he had had a prior relationship with one of the buyers who orally had promised compensation significant position to this key individual. But it was not the best deal for the sale of the company. It was not the maximum amount of money for the owners. As a result, he was not supporting the preferred owners in getting the deal done. This had the effect of lengthening the process, selling of the company. And what we had to do was basically stop the process of the sale of the company, restructure his incentives so that he was aligned with the maximum price for the sale of the company. And, you know, we see this, as I've said, a number of times. And the point is, if you're going to sell your company, when you sell your company, it really is important to align management, key people, and an incentive that supports the owners of the company to have a successful sale process.
And Bruce, I might add that we've seen on the other side of the coin situations where, when properly put in place, the sales incentives work very well. And I can think of one example where upside equity participation in the form of stock options was granted to the executive team well in advance of entering into a sales process. When it got close to entering into the sale, the executive team was very motivated. They knew that they were going to benefit from this. They're very motivated to work hard and to cooperate to degrees that hadn't been seen before. And the end result was a very, very successful sale process, and the executive team did a great job of supporting it. So we have seen examples where it works very well.
Yeah, that's great, Kevin. Yeah, thank you. It's really, really important to get the team working together to achieve the ultimate goal. I do believe we actually have a poll question on this topic. If we could go to that poll, Ed.
Yep, we sure can. So, ladies and gentlemen, you see the poll question up right now. And the question is, do you have management incentives in place at your company relating to the sale of the business? It's pretty easy. It's a yes/no question. So please go ahead and click and give us this answer. And I'll do a little Jeopardy music for you so you can get those answers in there. And so here we go. So bum 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 ba da 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 dum da dum bum bum ba dum ba dum bum 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 bum. So I'll give you just a little bit more time to answer this poll question. And once we have these answers in, we will react to it.
How are they coming in, Ed?
We got about 45% of the attendees have replied so far. So it's this is not hard, folks. It's a yes/no, pretty easy. All right, and here are our poll results. So 38% of the respondents say that yes, they do in fact have that. 50% say they do not, and 12% say they don't know. So gentlemen, who wants to respond to this first? Is it what you would expect?
Yeah, let me comment on this. Actually, it's a little better than what I and we would have expected. I'm pleased to see that almost 30 or 38% of the respondents have incentive plans in place for the sale of their company, to support the sale of the company, and that's really excellent. Half of them do not. For those of you who do not and are planning to sell your company in the near future, strongly encourage you to get those incentives in place for the key people in your team that are going to support the sale. Vitally important to get a deal done smoothly and in a timely fashion. And if you don't know, that's fine. It may be that you're not ready to sell your company, but please know that when you get to the point of thinking about selling your company, it really, really is vital to have aligned incentives in place for your senior team. So that's a great response. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Do we have any questions that came in, Ed?
I have not seen any new questions. So let me remind everybody, this is a good opportunity, that type your question into the Q&A, because we're going to take these questions throughout this presentation, not just at the very end. So if you have questions related to this, type your questions in and let us see it, okay? Let me ask one that we've sort of thought about in advance here, and that is, how far in advance should incentive agreements be put into place? It kind of relates exactly to what you were talking about anyway, Bruce.
Yeah, we need to go back a slide, folks. We recommend generally 2 years in advance for the putting in incentive plans. The earlier the better, obviously. The key is to have them in place, but 2 years is a better place to have them as a guideline that we use. Any other questions, Ed?
Let me see here. So if employees have stock, minority share, when should I involve them in the sale? That's a question.
I'll take a crack at it and invite my colleagues to add into it. It really depends on the company and the environment and climate of the company. In some cases, we've seen owners be upfront and share the information of the potential sale of the company to all the employees, so they recognize the process of what's going on and the rewards that will come along with it. In other cases, we've seen the contrarian view, where it's kept extremely confidential until the last moment, which is not necessarily what we would recommend.
Got another one for you. What works better as an incentive, equity or cash?
Good question, really good question. Depending on how the equity works, it could be extremely lucrative, obviously. But I think, if speaking as an individual, and I think in my experience and what we've seen the cash is the better option for the incentive structure, because the key manager knows that he's actually going to get something, whereas he takes a bit of risk if he's getting equity in the new organization.
Correct. And I would add in, Ed, that agreeing with Bruce, that he or she, if they're given equity, they get a vote. And we would prefer that our clients usually prefer that they don't lose any voting control. Even minority stock can have some kind of blocking control. So we would recommend that he or she be given a cash or structured such that it is a cash payment at the end. It could be an equity synthetic type of instrument, but true, pure voting stock is something we usually would recommend against.
Let me toss one more question out. Maybe, Bill, maybe you want to take this one. So do buyers get a little bit suspicious if selling management has really big incentives?
It's an excellent question. And yes, they do. And typically, we look at the current compensation of the executive pool and the executives, and we calibrate the payment. If it is a life-changing wealth event for management, it could demotivate them or disincentivize them. And buyers could be concerned that I now have a management team that is so wealthy that why should they come to work? Now, that's not very often in the middle market. In the upper market, if you do a multi-billion-dollar transaction and your executives are getting 0.5%, that could be a tremendous amount of wealth and a life-changing event. In the middle market, usually you don't see those kinds of numbers, but we should, and the client should, check. Because if you create such wealth for your management team that they don't have to come back to work, then yes, buyers do grow concern.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any others, Ed?
Yeah, I got one more I can toss out at you here. And so somebody asked, said, if the sale of my company is going to raise concerns with the staff and no others are shareholders, how do I incentivize without scaring them?
These, I assume, would not necessarily be senior management that would be incentivized. These are other people in the organization. That's how I interpret the question anyway, which is a good.
What I would expect too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I agree that that can be a concern. It's a very good question. And the way it usually gets defined is that it was an eventual happening in the course of the company that, given the owner's age or health, that there had to be a change of ownership, and that he will assure that the company will be sold to the best benefits of his employees. It is also an opportunity, given the circumstances, and each company is different, as you might imagine, but it is also an opportunity if there are members of the company who are not senior managers and therefore not properly incentivized, that it's the time to share the news with the entire company on the process that's going on, so that it stops the rumor mill and everyone understands what's going on and why it's a good thing in the end for the all individuals as well as the company.
Correct. And I would just add to that a comment about timing. It takes months to prepare a company for sale. And for most middle market companies, it doesn't require a large staff, maybe your top 3 executives. And so you put your management incentives in place for your top 3 or 2 or 4, and you keep the transaction quiet until you have a done deal. Post letter of intent, maybe even actually post signing purchase agreement if you have what we call a signed then close, but very late in the process. And what Bruce is referencing is that before you announce the deal, but when it's basically done, you would have a rollout to your staff, and in a way that he just mentioned, roll it out. But to be clear, you would not roll it out to anyone other than your discrete, private, small deal team that is properly incentivized until very, very late in the process.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Is that it, Ed, for questions?
Yeah, I think that's it for questions right at the moment. So
great. Then I will turn it over to Bill, who's going to talk about due diligence.
Thanks, Bruce. We refer to this as Project Blue. That's not the real name. Obviously, as you can imagine, I'm sure most people are aware, a lot of deals have code names, so that as we are talking with buyers about selling company X, we don't talk about company X, we talk about Project Blue. In this case, this is a made-up deal name. This was not called Project Blue. But this is a company that had about $2 to $10 million of EBITDA in the defense industry, new production, corporate orphan, which I'll talk about in a second. Acquired by a private equity firm with a platform in Europe, complementary programs and complementary similar products. The issue with this company was that it was a corporate orphan, meaning it was starved for resources. As a result, the management team was incomplete. There were actually positions missing. As a result of the lack of proper staffing and resources, when the buyers asked for due diligence, the management team was unable to successfully respond. The team was disorganized. Responses to buyers were delayed. Management presentations, that time when it's critical that the buyer meet the management team and gain confidence that the team can run the business well, pre-closing and post-closing, those meetings were unimpressive. Not that the individuals in the room weren't impressive, but there were people missing from the room. There were actually technologists missing from the room because the corporation entity that owned this business was channeling resources, management resources, and funding to other units. And as a result, this corporate orphan lacked actually a full C-suite, as we call it, the chief executive officer, the chief financial officer, the C-titled individuals, the management team was incomplete. And although it was a talented team of remaining individuals, the team was incomplete. The management presentations were unimpressive. Buyers lost confidence. The people that were in the room were talented, but the buyers lost confidence that this team, which was incomplete, could successfully run this business. As a result of this corporate orphan and its lack of resources, as we ran this auction, as we call a process like this, where we talk to multiple buyers, it was a thin auction, which is our jargon for saying not a lot of interest. And the more we met with potential buyers, the more buyers decided they weren't interested. As a result, we got a low multiple, low price for this corporate orphan business. Now, in the end, we got a price that exceeded our clients' expectations. Why? Because in the case of Project Blue, we talked with our client up front. You have a corporate orphan, okay? It's going to have issues in the sale process. And they understood that, and their price expectations were lower. And maybe they knew this, we didn't realize the extent of due diligence failures we were going to encounter. And on a perpetual basis, every time we tried to respond, or the client tried to respond to a due diligence question about the history or the projections of the business, buyers lost confidence, didn't gain confidence. And we'll talk more later this morning, if you're on the East Coast time zone, about issues related to confidence building. A number of these 5 issues of mistakes involve confidence building, and we'll talk about those as we go through. But in these due diligence failures, there were questions asked and there were incomplete answers. There were inconsistent answers. There were inaccurate answers. And although each individual failure was a problem or concern that required backpedaling and getting more information and correcting mistakes, the real issue with due diligence failures is, and was in this case, and is always in every deal we work on, when due diligence fails, buyers lose confidence. And the activity of selling a business has more to do with buyer confidence than anything else that we can imagine. And we've been doing this for 21 years. When buyers are confident in the business and what they're being told and the due diligence, they are comfortable paying a full price or a fair price. When buyers lose confidence, when due diligence fails, they either walk or they want to lower the price. And in the case of Project Blue, we knew going into this corporate orphan would be difficult. We didn't know how bad it would be. And this highlights other experiences we've had regarding due diligence failures. They're very detrimental to a sale process. Very detrimental. And so with that, unless there are questions, Ed, maybe there's some questions, or I can pass it off to Ryan at this point.
Operations, customers, HR, accounting, or is it something else?
I'll field that one. It's a great question. What I would say is that depending on circumstances, it's usually accounting. If, for example, in the case of Project Blue, which they didn't, but if they had a large environmental spill, if they had a large issue with a customer, that would obviously be paramount and elevate to be number one, because there was a problem. But if there's no specific problem, I think our experience, and I think I speak for my colleagues here, I'll say in my own words, my experience has been accounting. 90% of the process, post letter of intent, even post indications of interest, are accounting. And what I would say is that most of our clients don't have a chief financial officer. They may have a vice president of finance. They may have a senior accounting individual, but not the equivalent of a large public corporation chief financial officer. Some of our clients simply have a bookkeeper. That's their most senior accounting position. And what I would say is, going back and linking to Bruce's comment about management and incentives, and I can't stress this enough, for those that are thinking of selling their companies, your most senior accounting person is probably the most important person in the sale process regarding due diligence. And regarding your deal team, you need a senior accounting person. And if that person is your bookkeeper, that's, I think, got to be on your deal team. The due diligence is, in my experience, 90% accounting based.
Wow. Can I jump you back to the previous topic, incentives, for just a second, Bill, and ask how much does it cost to incentivize management?
Bruce, do you want to take that?
Yeah, very good question. The question is, how much does it cost? What's a guideline for incentives? And there's no absolutes in putting in incentives because it's a function of the company size, profitability, revenue, et cetera. But generally, we would recommend 2 to 3 times annual salary as a sales bonus incentive, given the successful closing of the sale of the company and the key employee is going to stay with the new entity. So 2 to 3 times their annual salary is generally enough to get the incentive in place so that the team member and team members will work together to achieve the ultimate goal. At the same time, as Bill mentioned earlier, you don't want them so enriched that these individuals become retirement ready, and that is not the objective. So 2 to 3 times seems to be the experience that we've had that works well. Is that it, Ed?
Well, there's one more question that's come in, and that's in any of these types of deals, doesn't the buyer always try to lower the price?
I'll take that because it's a due diligence question. And what I'll say is, and I'll be quick because I know we have 3 more items to get through and the clock keeps ticking here. Yes, buyers want to lower the price. And what I would equate it to is, and for those that are with us on this webinar, it's like buying anything, whether you're buying a company or you're buying a forklift, you're buying a copier. You want to find the right one, the best one for you, and buy it as cheap as you can. That's business. And so you find a great company, you really want to buy it, but you want to buy it as cheap as you can. And our experience has been that buyers will mostly legitimately, and we do a pretty good job of screening out buyers that don't belong in a process, but most buyers in aerospace and defense that have a good reputation won't make up excuses to lower the price. They will actually look for legitimate reasons to lower the price. Now, you can argue sometimes that line gets a little gray and maybe they're being a little less than reasonable or a little aggressive. But for the most part, our experience is it's legitimate behavior. And so if in due diligence, they find something that is truly wrong and it has a material impact on the valuation, they will clearly use that to lower the price. But our experience has been if we do our homework correctly and we present to the buyers all the material information during the initial bidding process, and we get a dozen people to bid based on a set of data, and then we move into due diligence with one buyer, as long as we did our homework and all of that information checks out correctly, we have actually taken away any buyer legitimate excuse to lower the price. And so maybe that's a webinar for a different day, but where due diligence fails can result in lowering the price materially. Doing homework properly and preparing for due diligence can ensure that the price does not get lowered. With that, Ed, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan.
Okay, so building off of that dovetails really nicely. This is one of the main ways in which a buyer will try and target something to legitimately bring down their initial bid or offer price. So now to Project Green. The key mistake in this case that he was not being prepared for sale, and that was primarily through a lack of supported projections. So now to walk through the study. Over on the right-hand side of your screen there, under the seller title, you can see that this case is based on a firm in the supply chain for commercial aviation with the EBITDA of around $2 to $10 million. It's owned by the original founder, and they were looking for a clean breakaway, and that meant they were looking for an 100% acquisition of the company. Now, over to the left-hand side of your screen, the case study itself, one of the most commonly disagreed upon topics between buyers and sellers is projections. It drives DCFs and valuations. So naturally, when buyers are looking for ways to, again, as we just mentioned, negotiate price downwards, and sellers are attempting to maximize their company value, this is a topic that's discussed in great detail. Being on the sell side, Alderman & Company, we conduct initial due diligence to evaluate the strength of our clients' projections, and we often help them in putting these together as well. The key considerations during projections are, do they have evidence to support their projections, and are they defendable? In this case study, the client was modeling projections higher than historic rates, and also modeling them higher than the going market rates as well. Projections can contradict those two sort of key metrics, as long as there's contracts and solid proof in place. In this case, there wasn't. Alderman & Company, what we done was we conducted what we now call a long-range sale preparation, which meant the client wasn't ready to go straight into the market. So rather than bringing them straight into the market and then them having an onslaught of buyer due diligence attacks, one way to call them, what we'd done was we were patient, and we took about 12 months to bring them into the market for sale. So during this preparation period, Project Green actually won a large contract to replace a part for one of the legacy airlines. This created solid proof to back their projections. In addition to attaining additional contracts, Project Green significantly improved their management team, which was one key aspect to this as well. A sophisticated buyer, now on the bottom right-hand side of your screen, a sophisticated buyer that's a very well-known name in aerospace and defense, came in and bought Project Green for what we believe to be a very fair and almost above market price. And then importantly, since the closing of this sale, we know that the selling company, the target, they actually achieved their numbers, and the buyer was very happy with their acquisition. So it's a nice sort of tale of turning something that was unsupported, turning it around, and then getting a price that everyone was really happy with. So unless there's any questions, we're going to go to a poll, I believe, Ed, then we can open it for questions again.
Actually, Ryan, I do have a question for you, and that is,
okay,
if a company's value is determined on futures and EBITDA was not considered when determining the value, can due diligence focus on EBITDA and then try to lower the value based on that?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that question there. So my interpretation of that is the projection was not based on EBITDA, and then the buyer due diligence focused on that?
I think, Ryan, I think the question is a little bit awkward. I just read it as well. I think the question is, if the value is determined based on projections, what can you do to prevent the buyer from lowering the price in due diligence? I think that's the question.
Okay. Yeah, got it. So, yeah, a couple of ways to kind of unpack that. So one thing that we really try and push is the projections themselves should be real, right? It should be based on contracts that are in place. And, you know, you don't want to leave value on the table by being overly conservative, but you also want them to be super defendable. So what we try and do is we ensure that these projections, based on our kind of market experience, based on contracts they have in place, and then based on somewhat conservative assumptions that may fill in some of the blanks, is we just put together projections that can certainly be defended. And if you start properly and you prepare properly from the start, it shouldn't be a tough process of buyer due diligence. You should be able to sail through buyer due diligence through having projections that are supported and having projections that can tell a story. You can say, well, it may look somewhat like a hockey stick, and we certainly try and avoid that. But if there's a solid storyline that goes along with it and can explain it, and it's something that's real, then it shouldn't be too difficult of a process during buyer due diligence.
Okay, do we want to go to the poll question?
Yeah, let's go to the poll.
All right, folks, here we go. Poll question number 2 for you. Do you forecast revenue and EBITDA beyond the current year? You got a couple of choices. So yes, we do. 2 years. Yes, we do. Greater than 2 years, or no, or simply I don't know. So please let us know what you do, and we'll put the results up here in a minute. And once again, here we go with the music from Jeopardy to get you through this process of submitting your answers. So dun 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 ba da 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 bum bum ba dum bum 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 brum dun 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 dun. So results are coming in. We got 43% of you have responded now. It's pretty easy. You just got to click on a couple of little buttons, people. 50% of the attendees are in. We'll see the results here in just a second, and there they are. So yes, 2 years, 31.4%. Greater than, 39.2%. No, 21%, and a few folks there don't actually know. So who would like to respond to this? Is this what you expect? And maybe that greater than 2 years might be more than you'd expect. That's my guess.
Yeah, I can take this one if we're happy for that. So I'll start with kind of the low-hanging fruit, as we like to say. Do not know. I'm assuming it's people in the position of they're not business owners, or they're not in the position of moving forwards with the sale. And then I can kind of bundle the three together by saying the largest being yes, greater than 2 years is actually, that's excellent. That's a little bit surprising on our end. But I guess, this webinar is tailored towards those who are considering sale. So we would say, a job well done. To bundle those together, one of the success criteria we see for businesses that are successfully kind of conducting their usual operations is 2 years forecasting and then 5 years for a strategic vision. It's kind of a nice little formula that can keep you headed in the right direction and then also keep you accountable month by month. And then just to wrap this up real quick, because I know we've got 2 more to conclude in about 16 minutes. So I think for those who are seriously considering sale, 5 years is the gold standard. If you're seriously considering sale and you're forecasting 5 years ahead, you're well positioned to go forwards in terms of preparing for a sale. So all in all, I think, congratulations to those who are going above 2 years. 5 years is perfect for sale. But if you're conducting usual day-to-day business, 5 years isn't necessary. It's only unless you're considering sale. So with that, I believe we can move on to the next slide.
Correct. I think that's me. Okay, Project Brown. And this is one of my pet peeves, if not my pet peeve. And I know my colleagues hear me talk about this all the time. Not achieving current year forecast is the item here. Project Brown, deal we did a while ago. EBITDA, again, $2 to $10 million range. Defense industry, new production, founder owned. Sold to a private equity firm with a platform. Very large private equity firm with a very large platform. Complementary programs and similar products. The issue here was the company didn't make their plan. And I'll read some of the words on the page, but it's that simple. despite our repeated guidance to this client and to all of our clients. Don't miss your current year plan. They were confident that they would exceed. They had us, and we went through them in great detail. We were all as a team confident they'd make the plan, and they failed. Each month that passed by, they kept missing their numbers. Deep in the sale process, buyers became more and more concerned as they learned the company continued to miss its numbers. It extended the process of due diligence significantly. And interestingly, and this may be news to some of the people that are on this webinar, it ended up costing the client a lot of money. Not that the price came down. In the end, the company was able to recover the future year forecast, which was based on firm backlog in the defense industry. As those in the defense industry know, there really are some firm backlog activities, and you can bank on future activities that are properly backlogged. And so we did recover on price in the end with that firm backlog for the post-closing period. However, the deal took months longer than it should have to complete. The deal almost cratered. And more importantly, in this case, but I'll talk about generally the issue in a second, but in this case, transaction fees, the actual professional fees for accountants and lawyers almost tripled. Why? Because the routine accounting work that was done, even tax work that was done, the buyer here lost confidence. And so they dug into everything 2, 3, 4 times. And every time you go back to the accounting firm and the law firm and you repeat the paperwork, they bill by the hour. And so this turned out to be an enormous professional services fee for this client, quite frankly, enormous. But the issue here is this, and I said this earlier, and I said it is a pet peeve of mine, but I think it's a legitimate concern. And that is that it's all about building confidence in the buyer, with the buyers. And there aren't many cases where you get the opportunity to actually prove yourself trustworthy to a client. You say you had this earnings last year, they check your numbers, but I mean, you had an accounting report. You're probably not going to mislead about your earnings last year because it's on a piece of paper. But you can make assumptions about your forecast, right? About 5-year projections. They're not going to prove out for 5 years. You can make a forecast about this year. And if you close before the year end, maybe no one will figure it out. The reality is buyers aren't that silly, and they do figure it out. And if you go through a process and you're saying that in X month and Y month, our revenue and our EBITDA, our profit will be A, B, and C, and you miss those numbers, even if you have a wonderful excuse, it's like, my dog ate the homework. It's not good enough. And so what we tell our clients is do not forecast numbers in the interim period, in the current year, while you're selling. Do not forecast monthly revenues and earnings you can't achieve. And the biggest issue is not that it's a multiple of EBITDA and you're going to lose value. That's really not where buyers go. Where buyers go is, you just told me 90 days ago you were going to do X, and now you're not doing it. Well, what do I do with that? That's the issue. Buyers lose confidence. And it's the comment that I made earlier about my slide about the corporate orphan. So much of the selling of a company in the middle market of aerospace and defense is about confidence building. And item number 4 is my pet peeve, because it's just a great way to do the exact opposite. If you can't make your current year forecast, you really damage your reputation with the buyer regarding trustworthiness. And it really is that big and that simple. If we have questions, Ed, I'm happy to take them on this slide, or I can push it over to Kevin.
I got one question. So how do you prevent prospective buyers from stealing key staff and not going through with the purchase? That can't be an issue.
That's a great question. And I'll answer the question as it relates to staff, but it also relates to process know-how. I mean, you can't steal a patent. I mean, you can try and steal a patent, but a patent typically you can't steal. But in our industry, as we all know, not a lot of stuff is patented. A lot of stuff is trade know-how, process know-how. And what prevents them from stealing that as well? Stealing your customers, not just your employees, stealing everything. And so 2 issues. Number 1 is you can't truly prevent it. You can have a good non-disclosure agreement written by a talented M&A attorney that doesn't write NDA agreements regarding contracts and licenses. They write NDAs regarding M&A transactions. Okay, this comes up to an issue that I'm foreshadowing my colleague's presentation, which I don't want to steal from. But the issue is a well-written NDA contract can give you legal protection. But what good is that? Okay, so here you are, you're a $30 million company, and you have an NDA, and a $500 million company is trying to steal your employees. Well, you have a great contract, and if you can go to court and withstand 8 years of litigation and $3 million in legal fees, you're going to win. But the issue is, can you afford even to pursue that litigation? And so there's two issues here. One is having a great M&A attorney and having great documents in place to protect you. The other is the reality of you probably can't enforce that. You can't afford to enforce that against certain buyers. And so the real way you prevent that is keep them out of the process and keep the information away from them. Don't give them the names of your employees until you're more confident they are the buyer, right? Give them the position. We have a journeyman, and that they've been in that job for 7 years and they have this skill set. I'm not giving you that person's name or email address or social security number. And so we spend a lot of time and effort, even after that great NDA is written, to protect our clients. It's not just the employee's name, it's your suppliers. Let's say your supply chain is critical to your success. We're not going to give away the names of your suppliers early in the process. And it's that diligence, working with our client to advise them to redact information and keeping it away from the buyers until we're very close to the end. It can be navigated. It's dangerous, but it can be navigated.
So why don't we jump ahead to
Yes, sir.
the next presentation?
Yes, sir. So with that being the last question for that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin Gould. And I foreshadowed a little bit. Hopefully I didn't steal too much, Kevin. You're going to talk about inexperienced professionals.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I mean, one of the most important decisions early on when you approach a sales process is the deal team that you put together. And an integral member of that is the attorney that you have representing you. Sales of companies are very complex, and there's a lot of nuances and specialized legal knowledge that's required. And so we counsel our clients to go out and hire an M&A experienced attorney. This case study that we have here was a mid-market company in the defense sector. They're involved in new production. They had kind of a complex ownership structure. And the buyer was a platform company owned by a PE firm, and both the programs and the products of the buyer were complementary to those of the seller. So it was a very good fit. Well, in this case, despite our encouragement, the client, the seller, decided that they wanted to have this longtime attorney, generalized business attorney, handle this matter for them. And they declined to go out and hire a M&A specialized attorney. And it really, they paid the price to a certain extent. There were two parts of the sale process where this really had a negative impact. The first was in responding to the buyer's due diligence requests. Because the attorney that they had elected to retain was not familiar with the process, the responses were both delayed and came out in a form that weren't expected. And so the buyer's attorneys were looking at this, couldn't quite make sense of a lot of it, and it just delayed things and kind of eroded the confidence in the seller. The second thing that happened was during the negotiations, the seller's attorney was focusing on issues that were immaterial, taking positions that were not normal in a sales transaction. And as a result, this caused more delay and kind of made the negotiations very confrontational. So at the end of the day, we believe that this is a good example where the seller is declining to hire an M&A attorney resulted in a sales transaction that was delayed. The terms were not as favorable as they could have been, and the price was not as high as it could have been. So With that, we'll go on and maybe there's questions that we should answer.
I think there's also a poll, which we may want to do first.
Okay. Ed, do you have a poll there?
Ed, I think Ed might be on mute.
I think Ed was, in fact, on mute. So the question is, do you have an M&A attorney already in mind for when you sell? So yes, no, we'll be using a generalist attorney. No, we're not contemplating selling. Going to need to find one, or the typical standard, I don't know. So here comes that Jeopardy music to let us know where you are on this, please. So dun 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 bum bum dun 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 dun. We've got 44% have answered so far, so we'll be coming pretty quickly to the results of this. And here are the results. So do you have one already in mind for when you sell? Yes, 45.7%. A generalist attorney was like almost nobody. Not contemplating, 13, and go find somebody, 32%. So reaction.
So this is really good news. So the folks either have one in mind or they know that they need to go find one. And so that's very positive. And a lot of times we'll be asked, do you have somebody that you recommend? And we say, yeah, we do, and we can provide those. But one of the most common questions we get is, how much should I budget for legal fees in my transaction? And so first quarter of this year, our firm, Alderman & Company, did a poll. And the question was, how much would you expect to pay, or have you paid, or have you charged on a $50 million transaction? And the average response was $572,000, about 1.14% of the size of the transaction. And of course, it's that'll be more for larger transactions and less for smaller ones. But that gives you kind of a rough idea of what people's experience has been. And you can find the results of that poll on the insights section of our website. There's a clickable link, and you can read the actual results of the poll. So I see we're running very low on time, but if there's any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, we are very low on time. And just before we go to the next question, I wanted to remind everybody to give their attention to the webinar survey. It's on the right of the presentation window. We'd like to have you fill out the survey because it will help us do a better job on future webinars. So I wanted to get that out there. One last question, I guess, before we run totally out of time, and that is, what do you do when a client is not making their current year forecast? How do you take care of that?
I'll take this, and I'll do it in less than a minute. And the answer is, and we've been there, and the answer is you disclose as early as you possibly can to the buyer to regain that confidence. So let's say that we're in September and you're going to miss October. You don't wait until October to go announce you're going to miss October. You announce in September, looks like we may be short in October, give them the details and the rationale, and then exceed that a little bit, do a little better than that. Now you've got a negative, you missed your numbers, but you told them up front, you did a little better than you said you were going to do. And now, to use sort of an athletic expression, instead of being on the heels of your feet, you are on the balls of your feet, leaning forward, and again, trying to regain that confidence from those buyers.
All right, Bill, you want to summarize?
I will, and I guess I've got 10 seconds here. And I'll just highlight here the 5 items, right? Please incentivize your key managers. Be well prepared for diligence. Assure that your projections are credible and can withstand attack. Don't miss current year forecasts, and hire a seasoned M&A attorney. That's the punchline. And so we presented them as being negative of things to do. We like to end on a positive note. And the positive note is take these 5 lessons learned and turn them into things that you need to do before you sell your business, and you'll be in much better shape.
All right, Bill, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. So before we sign off, I do want to thank all of our presenters. So Bill, Bruce, Kevin, and Ryan, as well as our sponsor, the Alderman Company. And as you can see up here on the screen, the company is larger than just their speakers. There are a lot of other folks that work for Alderman and Company as well. So within the next 24 hours, you're going to receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. With that, feel free to invite any of your colleagues who may not have been able to attend the event live today to go to that link, and they can also see this. Also, if we didn't get to your question, the questions, everything will be submitted to our panelists today, and they'll have the opportunity to respond to you offline back. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that. So with that, thank you so very much for attending, and have a wonderful remainder of your day.